The crowd roared with applause as Ethan Miller stepped onto the gleaming stage of American Heartland, the nation's most popular travel show. His weathered hands, still bearing traces of soil from that morning's work, trembled slightly as he accepted the microphone. The studio lights blinded him momentarily, but through the glare, he could see his small farming community filling the audience seats, their faces beaming with pride. 3 months ago, he'd been on the brink of losing everything now. Networks were fighting for his story. "I never meant to be anyone special," Ethan said, his voice wavering. "I just stopped to help someone stuck in the mud." What he didn't know then was that simple act of kindness would transform not just his life, but the future of his entire town. Before we carry on, let me know where you are watching from in the comments, and hit the subscribe button for something special tomorrow. Ethan Miller squinted at the darkening sky as he loaded the last bale of hay onto his rusted pickup truck. The scent of impending rain hung heavy in the air, mingling with the earthiness of freshly cut alfalfa. At 42, his body felt every one of those years, especially in his lower back, which protested each time he hefted another 60-pound bale. The day had started before sunrise, and now, with dusk approaching, he still wasn't finished with his work. His once thriving family farm had dwindled to just 75 acres of workable land. The rest he'd been forced to sell off piece by piece over the past decade as drought seasons, rising costs, and plummeting crop prices squeezed his livelihood from all sides. The land that had sustained 3 generations of Millers was slipping through his fingers like the dry soil of his fields during the worst summer heat waves. The first droplets of rain spattered against his weathered John Deere cap as Ethan climbed into the driver's seat. The truck's engine coughed reluctantly before catching, the familiar rattle of loose parts a constant reminder of repairs he couldn't afford. He eased onto the narrow county road that led back to his farmhouse, his mind already tallying up tomorrow's tasks. The mortgage payment was due next week, and he was still short by $800. "One day at a time," he muttered to himself, an affirmation that had become more mantra than motivation lately. The rain intensified, fat droplets slamming against the windshield faster than the ancient wipers could clear them. Through the watery blur, Ethan almost missed the silver gleam of metal off the road ahead. He slowed as he approached what appeared to be a luxury SUV tilted at an awkward angle, its front wheels submerged in the drainage ditch that ran alongside the road. Without hesitation, Ethan pulled over. In Riverdale County, you didn't drive past someone in trouble, no matter how pressing your own problems might be. That wasn't the way his father had raised him, and it certainly wasn't the way he'd raised his own son, Mark, who was away at college on a hard-won scholarship. Tugging his cap lower against the rain, Ethan jogged toward the stranded vehicle. Through the driver's window, he could make out a woman frantically pressing buttons on her phone. He tapped gently on the glass, causing her to startle and look up. The window hummed as it slid down halfway, revealing a striking woman in her late 30s with deep brown eyes and elegantly styled dark hair that seemed remarkably unaffected by the humidity. "Having some trouble?" Ethan asked, rain streaming down his face. The woman's expression melted from surprise to relief. "You could say that. I was following my GPS to the Riverdale Historic Covered Bridge, took what it swore was a shortcut, and ended up here." She gestured helplessly at her predicament. "I tried calling for roadside assistance, but there's no signal." Ethan nodded. "Cell coverage is spotty out here at best. That ditch gets treacherous after rain. Your wheels are dug in pretty good. I'm Sophia, by the way, Sophia Chen." She extended a manicured hand through the window. "Ethan Miller," he replied, taking her hand briefly while noting her firm grip. "I've got some chains in my truck. I might be able to pull you out, if you're comfortable with that." At this point, I'd be comfortable with just about anything that gets me back on solid ground. Sophia's smile revealed a small dimple in her right cheek. "I don't suppose there's a hotel nearby?" Ethan couldn't help but chuckle. "Not unless you count Mrs. Abernathy's bed and breakfast about 15 miles east, and even then, hotel would be stretching it." Despite the rain and her circumstances, Sophia laughed a warm, genuine sound that momentarily lifted the weight of Ethan's concerns. "Wait here where it's dry," he said, already moving back toward his truck. "I'll get set up." As Ethan worked to secure the tow chain between the vehicles, the rain mercifully slowed to a drizzle. The mud sucked at his boots, and by the time he had everything in place, his jeans were caked up to the knees. But there was something satisfying about the simple physics of the Tasquet problem he could actually solve, unlike the complex financial equation his life had become. With careful coordination between them, Ethan's truck groaned, but managed to pull Sophia's SUV free of the ditch's grasp. Once her vehicle was safely back on the gravel shoulder, he helped her inspect for damage. "Looks like you got lucky," he said, kneeling to check the undercarriage. "Just mud and a few scratches on the bumper." "Thanks to you," Sophia said, watching him with undisguised interest. "I really appreciate this, Ethan. Not many people would stop these days." He shrugged off her gratitude. "Anyone around here would have done the same." "I'm not so sure about that." She seemed to make a decision. "Listen, I'd like to thank you properly. Is there somewhere we could grab a coffee? I'm completely turned around out here, and I could use some local guidance anyway." Ethan hesitated. There was still the evening milking to do for the small herd of dairy cows he maintained, bills to review, and the leaking kitchen faucet he'd promised himself he'd fix today. But something in Sophia's expression, a blend of genuine gratitude and curiosity, made him nod. "Joe's Diner's about 10 minutes from here. Nothing fancy, but they make a decent cup of coffee. You can follow me if you'd like." As they drove toward town, Ethan glanced occasionally in his rearview mirror at the gleaming SUV behind him. The contrast between their vehicles couldn't have been more stark, her modern luxury against his decades-old utility. He felt a fleeting embarrassment about his circumstances, but pushed it aside. He'd done honest work his whole life. There was no shame in that. Joe's Diner sat at the edge of Riverdale's small downtown, its neon, open sign casting a red glow onto the wet pavement of the parking lot. At this hour, only a handful of vehicles occupied spaces outside. Ethan led Sophia to a booth by the window, nodding to a few familiar faces as they passed. Marge, who had been waitressing at Joe's since before Ethan was born, approached with a coffee pot in hand. "Evening, Ethan. Unusual to see you in town on a weeknight." Her curious gaze shifted to Sophia, taking in the woman's city clothes and the expensive watch on her wrist. "This is Sophia. Her car went off the road near Crooked Creek. Thought I'd help her get her bearings before she continues on." "Pleasure to meet you, honey," Marge said, filling 2 mugs with steaming coffee. "Any friend of Ethan's is welcome here. You two decide what you want to eat. I'll be back in a jiffy." Once they were alone, Sophia wrapped her hands around the warm mug. "So, Ethan Miller, tell me about yourself. Are you a lifelong resident of Riverdale?" "Born and raised," he confirmed. "Fifth-generation farmer, though the operation's a lot smaller than it used to be." "What do you farm?" "Bit of everything these days. Some corn, soybeans, hay. Keep a small dairy herd, maybe 20 head of cattle. Used to be more focused on dairy, but the market's been rough." Sophia nodded thoughtfully. "And family? Are you married?" The question, though innocent enough, touched a tender spot. "Widowed. My wife, Sarah, passed from cancer about 8 years ago. Got a son, Mark, studying agricultural science at State University." "I'm sorry about your wife," Sophia said softly, her eyes reflecting genuine sympathy. "It must have been difficult raising a son on your own while running a farm." Ethan shrugged, uncomfortable with the focus on his personal struggles. "We managed. Mark's a good kid. Smart 2 scholarship is covering most of his tuition. You must be proud of him. Every day." The simple truth of that statement brought a rare smile to Ethan's face. Their conversation paused as Marge returned to take their orders, a cheeseburger for Ethan and a chicken salad for Sophia. As they waited for their food, Sophia steered the conversation toward Riverdale itself, asking questions about local landmarks, history, and the challenges facing the community. "The covered bridge I was trying to find," she explained. "Is it worth the visit?" "It's one of the oldest in the state," Ethan said, warming to the topic. "Built in 1868. Local legend says Union soldiers used it during their march south. These days it's mostly a spot for teenagers to carve their initials and tourists to take photos." "And the town itself? How's it doing?" Ethan's expression sobered. "Struggling," Like a lot of small farming communities, the younger folks leave for college and don't come back. Main Street's got more empty storefronts than businesses now. The processing plant that employed about a third of the county closed 3 years ago. Sophia leaned forward, her interest clearly piqued. Yet you've stayed. Why? The question caught Ethan off guard. No one had asked him that. Before staying, it never seemed like a choice that required explanation. It's home, he said finally. My roots go deep here. My grandfather cleared some of that land with horses. My father expanded it during the good years. My son was born in the same farmhouse where I was. There's history in every acre. Even if it means struggling? Even then. Ethan took a sip of his coffee, surprised by his own candor with this stranger. Though I won't lie, it's been harder these past few years than I ever imagined it could be. Their food arrived, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Sophia told him she was a freelance travel writer working on a series about hidden gems in rural America. Ethan found himself relaxing in her company, impressed by her genuine interest in his community and her quick wit. As they finished their meal, the diner's door swung open, admitting Bernie Thompson, the bank manager whose signature would soon be required on foreclosure papers if Ethan couldn't make his payments. The older man nodded curtly in their direction before taking a seat at the counter. Sophia noticed the change in Ethan's demeanor. Someone you know? Bernie Thompson. Runs the local bank. Ethan kept his voice low. Nice enough guy, just doing his job. But when times get tough, he's usually the bearer of bad news for folks around here. Understanding dawned in Sophia's eyes. Including you? Ethan shifted uncomfortably. Let's just say we've had some difficult conversations lately. After paying for their meals, Sophia insisted on covering both. Despite Ethan's protests, they stepped outside to find the rain had stopped completely. The evening air was fresh and clean, carrying the scent of wet earth. I should point you toward that covered bridge before it gets too dark, Ethan said, checking his watch. The cows would be getting restless by now. Actually, I think I'll head back to Clayton for the night and try again tomorrow, Sophia replied, naming the nearest city about 40 miles away. But first, I have a small favor to ask. Would you mind if I took your number? I might need a local perspective for my article, and you've been so helpful already. Though surprised, Ethan agreed, reciting his cell number which Sophia carefully entered into her phone. Thank you again for the rescue, she said, extending her hand. Not just from the ditch, but for the company too. It's been a pleasure meeting you, Ethan Miller. As he watched her drive away, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that there had been something more to their encounter than chance, something in the way she'd asked her questions, in how intently she'd listened to his answers. But as the taillights of her SUV disappeared around a bend in the road, he dismissed the thought. People like Sophia Chen moved through different worlds than his. Their paths had crossed briefly, nothing more. The next morning arrived with clear skies and the familiar rhythm of farm chores. Ethan rose before dawn, his body operating on agricultural autopilot despite the late night. By mid-morning, he was repairing a section of fence damaged in yesterday's rainfall when his phone buzzed in his pocket. The text came from an unknown number. Good morning. It's Sophia from yesterday's ditch incident. Would it be too much to ask for a proper tour of your farm? I'm thinking it might make an interesting angle for my article. I can be there in an hour if you're free. Ethan stared at the message, conflicted. The rational part of him knew he should decline. There was too much work to be done, and showing a city writer around his struggling operation wasn't exactly his idea of a productive day. But another part, one he rarely acknowledged, was flattered by her interest and, if he was honest with himself, enjoyed her company. Before he could overthink it, he typed back, "Farm's nothing special, but you're welcome to visit. I'll be here." Exactly 59 minutes later, Sophia's SUV turned into his long gravel driveway. She stepped out wearing jeans, boots, and a simple button-down shirt attire, more practical than yesterday's business casual. A professional camera hung from a strap around her neck. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything crucial," she called as she approached. "This place is even more beautiful in the sunlight." Ethan followed her gaze across his property. Through her eyes, he tried to see beyond the peeling paint on the barn, the aging equipment, the fences in need of repair. The rolling fields, the mature oak trees that lined the drive, the farmhouse built by his great-grandfather there, was a certain timeless beauty to it all. "Let me show you around," he offered. For the next 2 hours, Ethan led Sophia through his daily world. They visited the small dairy operation, where he introduced her to each of his cows by name. He showed her the fields where generations of millers had coaxed life from the soil. He explained his recent experiments with sustainable farming practices attempts to reduce costs while preserving the land for future generations. Throughout the tour, Sophia asked thoughtful questions and took numerous photographs. She seemed genuinely moved when Ethan showed her the family cemetery on a small knoll overlooking the farm, where Sarah's grave lay alongside his parents and grandparents. "She loved this view," Ethan said quietly. "Said she could see all the seasons changing from this spot." Sophia nodded, her camera lowered respectfully. "I can see why. There's something eternal about this place." As they walked back toward the house, Sophia grew more focused in her questioning. How many local farms have closed in recent years? What would make the difference between survival and foreclosure for operations like yours? If you could change one thing about agricultural policy, what would it be? Her queries were pointed, almost journalistic in their precision. Ethan found himself opening up about challenges he rarely discussed. The crushing debt that kept him awake at night. The impossible choice between modernizing equipment and paying tuition. The emotional toll of watching neighboring farms being auctioned off piece by piece. "The thing is," he concluded as they reached the farmhouse porch, "I'm not looking for handouts. None of us are. We just want a fair shot. The system's tilted toward big corporate operations now. The family farm's becoming endangered, and with it, a whole way of life." Sophia studied him for a long moment, something unreadable in her expression. "Would you be willing to say all that on camera, Ethan?" "On camera?" "I should probably come clean," she said, a slight flush coloring her cheeks. "I'm not exactly a freelance travel writer. I'm Sophia Chen, host of American Heartland on the National Geography Channel. We showcase unique American communities and the people who make them special." Ethan stared at her, recognition slowly dawning. The travel show was popular enough that even he, who rarely watched television, had seen advertisements for it. "You're famous?" Sophia laughed. "I wouldn't go that far, but our show does reach about 3 million viewers weekly, and I think your story, Riverdale's story, deserves to be heard." The revelation left Ethan momentarily speechless. Yesterday he'd pulled this woman from a ditch, thinking her just another lost tourist. Now she was offering to put his struggling farm on national television. "I don't know," he said hesitantly. "I'm not much for cameras or spotlight." "That's exactly why you'd be perfect," Sophia countered. "You're authentic, Ethan. You live what you believe. Our viewers connect with real people facing real challenges, not polished corporate spokespeople." Before he could formulate a response, Sophia's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and grimaced. "I need to take this. It's my producer. Think about it, please. This could make a difference, not just for you but for farmers everywhere facing similar struggles." As Sophia stepped away to take her call, Ethan sank onto the porch steps, his mind racing. National television exposure could be a double-edged sword. On one hand, it might bring attention to the plight of family farms like his. On the other, he'd be exposing his personal struggles to millions of strangers. What would Mark think? Would the bank see it as a desperate publicity stunt? Sophia returned a few minutes later, her expression apologetic. "That was Ted, my producer. The network wants us back in Clayton tonight for a meeting about the next filming location. But listen, Ethan, I meant what I said. I think your story matters." She handed him a business card with the show's logo embossed in gold. "Take some time to think about it. If you're interested, call me in the next few days. My team could be back here as early as next week." After she left, Ethan stood in his driveway for a long time, the business card heavy between his fingers. The proposition seemed simultaneously absurd and like the lifeline he'd been unconsciously waiting for. But one question kept circling in his mind. Had her car really become stuck by accident, or had Sophia Chen deliberately sought him out? That evening, against his better judgment, Ethan searched for information about Sophia Chen and her show. His ancient desktop computer protested as he navigated to video clips and articles about American Heartland. The show appeared to have a solid reputation for respectful, in-depth portraits of rural communities, often overlooked by mainstream media. In interviews, Sophia came across as passionate and genuine in her desire to highlight authentic American experiences. There were no tabloid scandals associated with her name, no hints of exploitative journalism. If anything, the reviews praised her sensitivity when covering communities in crisis. One particular episode, featuring a former coal mining town in West Virginia, reinventing itself through arts and sustainable tourism, caught Ethan's attention. The portrayal seemed fair, showing both the town's struggles and its resilience, without resorting to either pity or false optimism. After 2 hours of research, Ethan reached for his phone. He had promised to call Mark tonight anyway, and he needed his son's perspective on this unexpected opportunity. Mark answered on the third ring, his voice carrying the background noise of his university's agricultural science building. "Hey, Dad. Everything okay at home?" "Everything's fine," Ethan assured him. "How's that soil composition project coming along?" For several minutes, they exchanged their usual updates: Mark's classes, the farm's conditions, local news. Finally, Ethan broached the subject weighing on his mind. "Something unusual happened yesterday. I pulled a woman's car out of a ditch near Crooked Creek." "Sounds like a typical Tuesday for you," Mark joked. "Turns out she's Sophia Chen from that TV show American Heartland. She wants to feature our farm on her program." The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. "Wait, seriously? The Sophia Chen? Her show is huge, Dad." "You've seen it?" "My roommate watches it religiously. They do these amazing deep dives into different communities. Last month they featured this apple orchard in Washington that was using innovative irrigation techniques to survive drought conditions. The owner got so many orders after the show aired that they had to hire 10 new employees." End quote. Hope flickered in Ethan's chest, though he tried to temper it. "I'm not sure it's right for us, Mark. You know how private we've always kept things." "Dad," Mark's voice grew serious. "Privacy won't pay the mortgage. We both know the farm's in trouble. If this could help, even a little, isn't it worth considering?" His son's practical assessment struck Ethan forcefully. When had their roles begun to reverse, with Mark now offering the pragmatic guidance? "What about your future?" Ethan asked. "If I air all our financial troubles on national television, how will that affect you?" "I'm studying agricultural science because I want to come home someday and help save our farm," Mark replied quietly. "But for that future to exist, the farm needs to survive until I graduate. I'm not ashamed of our struggles, Dad. No one working honestly should be." After they hung up, Ethan sat on his porch, watching darkness settle over his fields. The evening routine of rural life played out around him. Distant tractors returning to barns, birds making final calls before nesting, the first stars appearing in the deepening blue sky. His entire adult life had been defined by self-reliance. Asking for help, much less putting his troubles on display for a television audience, went against everything in his nature. But Mark was right, pride wouldn't save the farm. If there was even a chance this exposure could create new opportunities, didn't he owe it to his son, to Sarah's memory, to their shared dream of passing this land to future generations? The decision settled into place with surprising clarity. In the morning, he would call Sophia Chen. 3 days later, a convoy of 3 vehicles turned into Ethan's driveway. A sleek production van emblazoned with the National Geography Channel logo, Sophia's now familiar SUV, and a rental car carrying by additional crew members. By mid-morning, his quiet farm had transformed into a bustling television set. Ted Winters, the show's executive producer, was a surprisingly down-to-earth man with salt and pepper hair and a firm handshake. "We typically spend about a week filming for each episode," he explained as they walked the property. "Our goal is to capture the authentic rhythm of life here, not stage artificial moments." Sophia, now in her professional element, moved through the farm with confident purpose, conferring with the camera operators about angles and lighting. Yet whenever she caught Ethan's eye, she offered an encouraging smile that helped ease his growing anxiety. "Remember," she told him during a quiet moment, "just be yourself. That's who I met that rainy evening, and that's who our viewers need to see." The first day's filming focused on establishing shots of the property and Ethan's daily routine. A camera followed him as he milked the cows, repaired equipment, and inspected crops. Though initially self-conscious, he gradually grew more comfortable with the constant observation. On the second day, Sophia conducted a formal interview with Ethan in his kitchen at the heart of the home, where 3 generations of millers had gathered around the same oak table. The questions explored his family history, the evolution of farming practices over the decades, and the current challenges threatening his livelihood. "What keeps you going?" Sophia asked, her expression genuinely curious. "When the bills pile up and the weather doesn't cooperate, and the market prices drop, what makes you get up every morning and try again?" Ethan considered the question carefully. "There's something profound about working land that your great-grandfather worked, about knowing exactly where your food comes from, about watching seeds you've planted push through soil and reach for the sun." He paused, gathering thoughts he'd never fully articulated before. "I believe farming isn't just a job, it's a calling. It's being a steward of something bigger than yourself. Even on the hardest days, that means something." As the week progressed, the focus expanded beyond Ethan's individual story. The crew interviewed other local farmers facing similar challenges. They filmed at Joe's Diner, capturing conversations among community members about Riverdale's changing landscape. They spoke with Bernie Thompson about the financial realities forcing family farms into foreclosure. To Ethan's surprise, Bertie seemed genuinely supportive of the project. "Maybe this will help people understand what's happening to rural America," the banker said after his interview. "Nobody in Washington seems to be listening." By the 5th day, word had spread throughout the county about the television show filming in their midst. Neighbors stopped by with homemade pies and casseroles for the crew. The mayor called to thank Ethan for bringing positive attention to their struggling town. Even his son Mark drove home for the weekend, eager to participate in documenting their family legacy. "This is surreal," Mark commented as they watched the crew setting up lights for an evening shot of the farmhouse. "I keep thinking I'll wake up and find it was all a dream." "You and me both," Ethan agreed. On the final evening of filming, Sophia organized an impromptu gathering at the farm. Local families brought potluck dishes, and tables were set up in the yard beneath string lights. The crew integrated seamlessly with the townspeople, creating a warm community atmosphere that felt both genuine and cinematic. As dusk settled over the celebration, Sophia found Ethan leaning against the fence, watching the scene with quiet amazement. "This is what we try to capture," she said, gesturing toward the tables where neighbors laughed and shared food. "Not just struggles, but resilience. Not just individuals, but communities." "You've done something special here," Ethan admitted. "For a few days, you've reminded everyone what makes this place worth fighting for." Sophia studied him thoughtfully. "Can I ask you something off the record?" He nodded, curious. "Why did you agree to this? When I first proposed it, you seemed reluctant. What changed your mind?" "My son," Ethan said simply. "He believes in the future of this place even more than I do. I realized I needed to fight for that future using every tool available, even ones that make me uncomfortable." "The episode won't air for about 2 months," Sophia explained. "Post-production takes time, but when it does..." She hesitated. "I think you should prepare for things to change. For better or worse? In my experience, usually both." As the film crew packed up their equipment the next morning, Ethan felt an unexpected melancholy. The week had been exhausting, but also exhilarating in ways he hadn't anticipated. The farm seemed strangely quiet as the last vehicle pulled away, Sophia waving from the passenger seat, her promise to stay in touch hanging in the air between them. Life gradually returned to its familiar patterns. Ethan rose with the sun, tended to his animals, worked his fields, and fought the same financial battles as before. The only evidence of the filming was the occasional question from a neighbor about when the show would air and a business card tucked carefully in his wallet. 8 weeks later, Ethan received a text from Sophia, The episode airs this Sunday at 8 p.m. The whole team is proud of how it turned out. I hope you'll watch. That Sunday evening, Ethan invited a small group to join him: Mark, who had driven home for the occasion, Marge from the diner, and his closest neighbors, the Hendersons, who had kept his farm running during the week of L&I. Filming. They gathered awkwardly in his rarely used living room, the television set powered on for the first time in months. As the familiar theme music of American Heartland filled the room, Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs. What had he been thinking, exposing his struggles to the nation? What if they had edited his words to make him appear pathetic or bitter? What if his spiral of anxiety broke as the screen filled with aerial footage of his farm, golden in the light of sunset? Sophia's voice narrated. In the heart of Riverdale County sits a farm that has weathered 5 generations of American history. Through world wars and economic depressions, through personal tragedy and triumph, the Miller family has persevered, their hands in the same soil their ancestors tilled. But today, like thousands of family farms across our nation, they face their greatest challenge yet: survival in an age of industrial agriculture. For the next hour, Ethan watched his life unfold through the lens of professional storytellers. The narrative they crafted was neither sensationalized nor sanitized. It acknowledged the harsh realities of modern farming while celebrating the deep connection to land and community that motivated people like him to continue against mounting odds. The episode wove together multiple perspectives: his own candid interviews, Mark's passionate belief in sustainable agriculture, Bernie Thompson's conflicted position as both community member and foreclosure agent, neighboring farmers' similar struggles, and historical context that helped viewers understand how policy changes had gradually undermined family farming operations. Most powerfully, the show presented Ethan not as a victim, but as a steward of both land and tradition, fighting to preserve something valuable for future generations. The final scene showed him standing in his fields at dawn, dew glistening on corn stalks, as he explained to Sophia why he refused to give up. When the credits rolled, the room remained silent for several moments. Mark squeezed his father's shoulder, eyes bright with emotion. Marge dabbed at tears with a napkin. The Hendersons nodded in solemn appreciation. "They got it right," Mrs. Henderson said finally. "They actually got it right." Ethan's phone began buzzing almost immediately. Texts from distant relatives who had watched the show, calls from friends in neighboring counties, even an email notification from his rarely checked account. But it wasn't until the next morning that he began to understand the true impact of his television appearance. By noon on Monday, his voicemail was full. The local newspaper wanted an interview. A regional agricultural college requested his participation in a panel discussion on sustainable farming. 3 different organic food co-ops inquired about purchasing arrangements directly from his farm, bypassing the corporate middlemen who skimmed much of his profits. Most surprisingly, a representative from a national foundation that supported family farms called to discuss grant opportunities for operations transitioning to more sustainable practices. The programs she described would provide both funding and expert consultation, exactly the kind of assistance Ethan needed to modernize his operation without taking on additional debt. The community response was equally overwhelming. Local restaurants reached out about featuring his dairy products on their menus with farm-to-table branding. The high school agricultural teacher asked if he would consider hosting student visits. Neighboring farmers called to discuss forming a cooperative that might give them collective bargaining power in the marketplace. By Wednesday, Ethan needed to enlist Mark's help just to organize and respond to all the inquiries. They set up a makeshift office in the dining room, creating spreadsheets to track potential opportunities and prioritize responses. "Dad, look at this," Mark said, showing him an email from a viewer in Seattle. "She wants to adopt one of your cows through a monthly subscription. She'd receive updates about the cow's health and samples of dairy products. She says she paid $200 monthly for the connection to where her food comes from." Ethan shook his head in amazement. "That's more than we make on milk from that cow in 2 months of selling to the processing plant." And here's another one. A family in Chicago wants to pre-purchase a half share of next season's crops. They'd pay now, which would help with planting costs, and receive weekly produce boxes during harvest season. The concept wasn't entirely new. Community-supported agriculture had been growing in popularity for years, but Ethan had never considered it viable for his remote location. Now, with national exposure, geographical limitations seemed less relevant. Late Thursday afternoon, Ethan finally found time to call Sophia, who had left several supportive messages throughout the week. "I've been watching the response on social media," she said when she answered. "Your episode is already one of our most viewed this season. It's been—" Ethan searched for adequate words. "Overwhelming, in mostly good ways. I hoped it might create some opportunities, but this sounds extraordinary." Ethan described the flood of inquiries, from local partnerships to distant consumers wanting direct connections to their food source. "I never imagined so many people would care about one farmer story." "That's just it, Ethan," Sophia replied. "It wasn't just your story. You became the face of something many Americans feel deeply about: the loss of connection to where their food comes from, the disappearance of a way of life they value even if they don't live it themselves." After a brief pause, she added, "The network has received interesting feedback too. Several major agricultural policy advocates have reached out about featuring the episode in upcoming congressional hearings on farm subsidies. And 3 different sustainable agriculture organizations want to use clips for educational purposes." End quote. The conversation shifted to practical matters: how to manage the sudden attention, which opportunities to prioritize, potential pitfalls to avoid. Sophia offered advice based on previous subjects from her show who had experienced similar surges of public interest. "The spotlight will fade," she cautioned. "That's inevitable. The question is, what foundation you build while it's shining on you." Some early enthusiasts disappeared when they understood the practical challenges of farm-to-table arrangements across long distances. Others balked at premium prices necessary to make direct sales sustainable. But amid the inevitable winnowing, genuine opportunities solidified. A coalition of 15 families in Clayton committed to season-long subscriptions for dairy and produce. 3 farm-to-table restaurants formalized purchasing agreements that promised fair prices and featured the Miller Farm by name on their menus. The Sustainable Farming Foundation approved a modest grant that would cover half the cost of water conservation equipment Ethan had coveted for years. Most significantly, Bernie Thompson called with unexpected news. An anonymous investor had approached the bank about providing a low-interest refinancing option for Ethan's existing mortgage. "They specifically mentioned seeing you on American Heartland," Bernie explained, sounding both mystified and impressed. "Said they're interested in preserving family farms as working examples of traditional American values. The terms they're offering would reduce your monthly payment by about 30%. Ethan listened with cautious optimism. "What's the catch?" "That's just it. I've gone through the paperwork with a fine-tooth comb, and there isn't one. No balloon payments, no ownership stake, no requirement to grow specific crops. The only stipulation is that the land remain an active family farm for at least 15 years. The financial relief this single arrangement offered was more substantial than all the other opportunities combined. For the first time in years, Ethan could see a path forward that didn't require constant crisis management. 6 weeks after the episode aired, Sophia called with another proposition. "The network loves the response to your story," she explained. "They've approved a follow-up segment, not a full episode, but a 15-minute update that would air as part of our season finale." Ethan hesitated. While grateful for the original exposure, he'd just begun adjusting to a life not constantly observed by cameras. "What exactly would that involve?" "Just 1 day of filming. We'd focus on the community response and any changes you've implemented since the episode. It would air in about 3 months, giving viewers closure on your story." After discussing it with Mark, Ethan agreed. This time, the filming process felt more natural, less intrusive. The crew was smaller: just Sophia, a cameraman, and a sound technician. They captured footage of new irrigation systems being installed, interviewed local restaurant owners who now featured as products, and filmed a community meeting where neighboring farmers discussed forming a cooperative inspired by Ethan's experience. For the final interview, Sophia suggested they return to the spot where they'd first met, the drainage ditch that had changed everything. Standing on the roadside where her car had once been stuck, they reflected on the journey since that rainy evening. Looking back now, Sophia asked, "Would you make the same choice to stop and help a stranded motorist?" Ethan smiled. "Some choices define who we are. That was one of them." "And agreeing to share your story?" He considered this more carefully. "That was harder. I was raised to handle problems privately, to not burden others with my troubles. But I've learned something important through all this sometimes. The most valuable thing we can offer others is our truth, even when it's uncomfortable." The follow-up segment aired in late autumn, as the last of the harvest was being gathered across the Midwest. While it didn't create the same wave of response as the original episode, it reinforced the connections Ethan had already established and introduced his story to viewers who had missed the first broadcast. Among those new viewers was Catherine Delaney, the newly appointed Undersecretary for Rural Development at the Department of Agriculture. 3 weeks after the segment aired, her office contacted Ethan about participating in a regional forum on family farm preservation. "We're bringing together farmers, policy experts, and financial institutions to develop actionable recommendations for the next farm bill," the invitation explained. "Your perspective as both a traditional farmer and someone adapting to modern challenges would be invaluable." When Ethan shared the invitation with Mark during their weekly call, his son's excitement was palpable even through the phone. "Dad, this is exactly what you should be doing. Your story resonates with people because it's authentic. You're not some corporate lobbyist or political appointee, you're the real thing." "I'm just one farmer, Mark. What difference can I really make in Washington? Remember what Mom always said? Change happens one person at a time. Someone has to speak for places like Riverdale. Why not you?" Sarah's words, echoed through their son, struck a chord that vibrated through Ethan's uncertainty. His late wife had always been the more outspoken of the two, the one who wrote letters to elected officials and organized community initiatives. Perhaps this was a way to honor her memory as well. The regional forum was held in Chicago in early December. Ethan felt profoundly out of place amid the sleek conference facilities and policy experts with advanced degrees. He'd packed his one good suit, the one he'd worn to Mark's high school graduation, and practiced his talking points during the 4-hour drive from Riverdale. The first session featured presentations from agricultural economists about market trends and regulatory impacts. Ethan listened attentively, recognizing his own struggles in the abstract data points and trend lines projected on screens. During the lunch break, he remained quietly at his assigned table while others networked around him. "Mr. Miller? I'm Catherine Delaney." Ethan looked up to find a composed woman in her 50s standing beside his table. Her handshake was firm, her gaze direct and assessing. "Thank you for making the trip," she continued, taking the seat beside him. "I watched both your segments on American Heartland. Your perspective is exactly what these discussions often lack, the lived experience of policy decisions." "I appreciate the invitation," Ethan replied, "though I'm not sure how much I can contribute to such technical conversations." Catherine smiled. "Technical expertise is abundant in Washington. What's scarce is authentic understanding of rural communities. That's why I insisted you be included in this afternoon's panel." The afternoon session proved less intimidating than Ethan had feared. Seated alongside a third-generation rancher from Wyoming, an organic vegetable farmer from Georgia, and an agricultural policy analyst, he found himself speaking with growing confidence about the practical realities of modern farming. "The regulatory burden falls disproportionately on small operations," he explained when asked about compliance challenges. "A family farm with 2 part-time employees faces essentially the same paperwork as a corporate operation with dedicated BA administrative staff. We're not asking for fewer safety or environmental standards, just implementation that recognizes our resource limitations." End quote. As the forum concluded, Catherine approached him again. "Your comments today were valuable, Mr. Miller. Would you consider serving on a more formal advisory committee? We're establishing a working group specifically focused on family farm preservation strategies." The invitation represented another crossroads, a potential step from private citizen to public advocate. It would mean quarterly trips to Washington, time away from the farm, exposure to political complexities he'd always avoided. "I'd need to think about it," he said honestly. "My first responsibility is still to my own operation." Catherine nodded understandingly. "Of course. But consider this, your story has already impacted more people than you realize. Sometimes a single authentic voice can change the conversation in ways that statistics and policy papers never could." That evening in his hotel room, Ethan called the one person whose opinion would most influence his decision. Mark answered immediately, as if he'd been waiting for his father's call. "How did it go?" his son asked eagerly. Ethan described the day's events, the unexpected invitation, and his reservations about accepting a more public role. "The farm has to come first," he concluded. "I can't be effective speaking for family farmers if I can't keep my own operation viable." "Dad," Mark replied with uncharacteristic firmness, "remember when we discussed whether to do the TV show? You told me you needed to fight for our future using every available tool. This is another tool, maybe the most powerful one yet. You know, it would mean more time away from home, more responsibilities, more public scrutiny. Then we adapt. I can come home more weekends. We can hire Rob Henderson's kid to help with daily chores. He's been looking for steady work since graduation. The community will step up, just like they did during day filming." His son's confidence gave Ethan pause. When had Mark become so certain, so strategic in his thinking? The boy who had once needed help tying his shoes was now mapping out a path that Ethan himself couldn't clearly see. "There's something else," Mark added, his voice softer. "Mom would be so proud to see you fighting this way. Not just for our farm, but for every family like ours. She always said you had wisdom people needed to hear." The mention of Sarah settled something in Ethan's chest. He could almost feel her presence, urging him toward this unexpected path with the same gentle determination she'd shown throughout their marriage. The next morning, before heading home, Ethan called Catherine Delaney to accept her invitation. "I can't promise to be the most eloquent voice on your committee," he warned, "but I can share what I know from 40 years of working the land." "That's precisely what we need," she assured him. "Eloquence we can find anywhere. Experience like yours is irreplaceable." By mid-January, news of Ethan's appointment to the advisory committee had spread throughout Riverdale County. The local paper ran a front-page story celebrating the selection of a hometown representative to influence national policy. Former skeptics, who had questioned his decision to appear on television, now approached him at the feed store or diner to share concerns they hoped he would carry to B.A. Washington. His first committee meeting was scheduled for February, a 3-day session that would require his longest absence from the farm since Sarah's funeral. The preparation was intensive. Background materials to review, position papers to understand, logistics to arrange. Mark insisted on coming home that weekend to manage operations with Rob Henderson's son Tyler, giving Ethan one less worry. 2 days before his departure, Ethan received an unexpected call from Sophia. "I heard about your appointment," she said, her voice warm with pride. "The network is thrilled. We're considering a special report on farmers entering policy discussions. Would you be open to a brief interview while you're in DEA?" See? I'm still adjusting to this new role," Ethan admitted. "Not sure I'm ready for more cameras just yet." "I understand completely. But remember, your story helps others see possibilities for themselves. Every time you speak up, another farmer somewhere finds courage to do the same." Her words stayed with him during the flight to Washington, his first air travel in over a decade. Looking down at the patchwork of fields and forests, roads and rivers that made up the American landscape, Ethan reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that a simple act of kindness had set in motion. The advisory committee convened in a Department of Agriculture conference room with views of the National Mall. Around the polished table sat representatives from diverse agricultural backgrounds: dairy farmers from Wisconsin, citrus growers from Florida, cattle ranchers from Texas, wine producers from California. Despite their regional and operational differences, their fundamental challenges echoed Ethan's own. Weather uncertainties, market volatilities, succession planning, and the constant struggle to adapt traditional practices to modern realities. During introductions, several committee members mentioned seeing Ethan on American Heartland, making him realize how thoroughly his private identity had merged with his public story. For better or worse, he was now that farmer from television. To many people, Catherine Delaney moderated the discussions with respectful efficiency, steering conversations toward concrete recommendations whenever they drifted toward complaint or generality. By the second day, Ethan found himself contributing regularly, discovering that his practical perspective offered something valuable to the policy specialists in the room. The paperwork burden isn't just about time, he explained during a discussion of regulatory compliance. It's psychological. When you're already working 14-hour days and barely staying afloat, facing another form with $100 per day penalties for errors creates a kind of despair that's hard to quantify. That's where we lose people, not just to the penalties themselves, but to the hopelessness they reinforce. As the final session concluded, Catherine asked each member to identify their top priority for the committee's work over the coming year. When Ethan's turn came, he spoke from his deepest conviction. Access to capital under terms that respect agricultural realities, he said firmly. The current lending system treats farms like any other business, ignoring the seasonal nature of income, the weather dependencies, the multi-year investment horizons. We need financial products designed for agricultural livelihoods, not just agricultural businesses. His statement prompted thoughtful nods around the table. A rice farmer from Louisiana added, and those products need to be available through local institutions that understand regional conditions, not just megabanks headquartered in financial centers. The committee's final recommendations would take months to formalize, but the foundation of shared understanding had been established. As members exchanged contact information and farewell handshakes, Ethan felt a cautious optimism that their collective voice might actually influence policy decisions. That evening, he met Sophia for dinner at a modest restaurant near his hotel. She arrived with a small camera crew, but assured him they would film only a brief segment if he felt comfortable. The network loved the idea of following your journey from the ditch to D.C., she explained once they were seated. Not many human interest stories develop this kind of substantive impact. Ethan considered her request. 6 months ago, he would have declined immediately, protective of his privacy and wary of exposure. But he'd seen firsthand how his story had resonated with viewers, creating tangible change not just for his farm, but for his entire community. I'll answer a few questions, he agreed, but I don't want to position myself as any kind of expert or representative. I'm still figuring this out as I go. Sophia nodded understandingly. When the cameras rolled, her questions focused on his evolution from reluctant subject to active participant in policy discussions. What's been the most surprising part of this journey? She asked. Ethan thought for a moment, discovering that my voice matters. I spent years feeling invisible to the systems and institutions that govern my livelihood. Now I'm sitting at tables where decisions get made, and people are actually listening. And how has the community responded to your new role? With support that humbles me daily. Neighbors who never asked for help are sharing their challenges, trusting me to represent their reality accurately. That's a responsibility I take seriously. After the cameras stopped, they continued their conversation privately. Sophia shared behind-the-scenes stories from other episodes, her perspective on rural representation in media, and her own journey from journalism school to television host. I grew up in suburban Connecticut, she confessed. When I started this show, I was terrified of misrepresenting communities I hadn't experienced firsthand. I've learned that authentic curiosity and genuine respect open more doors than presumed expertise ever could. As they parted that evening, Sophia mentioned that her show would be filming in Nebraska the following month. If you're ever interested in more formal involvement with the program as a consultant or special correspondent for agricultural issues, I think you'd bring something unique to our team. Ethan laughed, shaking his head at the very concept. I think I've got enough new roles to adjust to for now, but I appreciate the vote of confidence. The flight home gave Ethan time to process the whirlwind events of the past few days. Something fundamental had shifted in his understanding of his place in the world. For decades, he had viewed himself primarily in relation to his land as a steward of soil and keeper of family tradition. Now, he was being asked to see himself as something more, a bridge between rural realities and policy abstractions, a voice for experiences often absent from national conversations. Mark and Tyler met him at the regional airport, eager for details about the committee meetings and his impressions of Washington. As they drove home through familiar countryside, Ethan felt the tension in his shoulders gradually release. No matter what new responsibilities he assumed, this landscape remained his anchor. The fields and forests, the rhythms of seasonal change, the stubborn persistence of life taking root and bearing fruit through cycles of challenge and renewal. Spring arrived with its usual demands and promises. As Ethan prepared fields for planting, he balanced farm work with his expanding responsibilities. Weekly calls with other committee members, occasional interviews with agricultural publications, and planning for the next in-person meeting required careful time management. But the farm's financial outlook had improved dramatically since the previous year. The refinanced mortgage providing breathing room, new direct-to-consumer arrangements ensuring better prices, and the equipment grant enabling more efficient water usage. In late April, an email from Sophia arrived with surprising news. American Heartland had received an industry award nomination specifically citing the episodes featuring Ethan's story. "The awards ceremony is in Los Angeles next month," she wrote. "The network would cover all expenses if you'd consider attending as our guest. Mark would be welcome too, of course." Ethan stared at the screen, trying to reconcile this Hollywood invitation with the mud he'd scraped off his boots just minutes earlier. The juxtaposition seemed almost comical, from pre-dawn milking to red carpet within the same month. Yet he recognized that declining would disappoint not just Sophia and her team, but the community that had supported his increasingly public journey. After consulting with Mark, who enthusiastically encouraged him to go, Ethan accepted the invitation. Tyler had proven himself capable of handling additional responsibilities, and the timing fell between critical planting and initial cultivation stages. The night before his departure for Los Angeles, Ethan found himself drawn to the family cemetery on the knoll overlooking the farm. Standing before Sarah's grave in the gentle evening light, he felt both the weight of her absence and the warmth of her continued presence in his life. "You wouldn't believe the turns this road has taken," he said softly. "Television appearances, Washington committees, now award ceremonies in California. Not exactly what we planned when we took over from Dad, is it?" The breeze rustled through nearby oak leaves trees, planted by his grandfather when Ethan was just a boy. He imagined Sarah's practical response. "As long as it serves the land and our family, the path doesn't matter." That had always been her wisdom, focusing on purpose rather than plans, on values rather than specific visions of how life should unfold. Her flexibility had balanced his tendency toward rigidity, her openness to new possibilities complementing his devotion to tradition. "I'm trying to honor both," he told her, "keeping faith with what matters, while opening doors I never thought to look for." The awards ceremony was held at a gleaming venue in downtown Los Angeles, a world away from Riverdale County in every conceivable dimension. Ethan and Mark, both uncomfortably elegant in rented tuxedos, followed Sophia through a gauntlet of photographers and entertainment reporters. "Just smile and keep walking," she advised, skillfully guiding them past the most aggressive cameras. "We'll be inside soon." The interior was a cathedral to entertainment industry excess: crystal chandeliers, flowing champagne, celebrities whose faces Ethan vaguely recognized from magazine covers glimpsed at the grocery store checkout. Mark, despite his usual composure, couldn't hide his amazement at their surroundings. "Dad," he whispered as they were shown to their table. "There's a guy from those superhero movies, 2 tables over." Ethan smiled at his son's excitement. "Just remember, we're heading back to reality tomorrow. Cows don't care about celebrity sightings." Their category Outstanding Human Interest series came midway through the ceremony. When American Heartland was announced as the winner, Sophia squeezed Ethan's arm in delighted surprise before making her way to the stage with Ted and 2 network executives. After thanking her production team and the network, Sophia continued, "But this award really belongs to the communities and individuals who trusted us with their stories, particularly Ethan Miller and the people of Riverdale County, Who showed us that America's heartland isn't just a geographical region, but a space of authentic connection, resilience, and purpose. Ethan is here tonight, and I hope his presence reminds everyone in this room that the most compelling stories aren't created in writers' rooms but lived in fields and factories, classrooms and kitchens across this nation. The spotlight found Ethan, momentarily blinding him as applause filled the vast room. Mark nudged him encouragingly, and Ethan managed an awkward wave of acknowledgement before the light mercifully moved back to the stage. At the network's after-party, he found himself approached by producers, directors, and executives, curious about his unlikely journey from private citizen to televised subject to policy advisor. Most conversations were briefly congratulatory, but a few individuals engaged more deeply, particularly those with rural backgrounds of their own. "My grandfather had a dairy farm in Vermont," one senior producer told him. "Watching your episodes brought back memories of visiting him as a child, the particular quality of pre-dawn light in the barn, the steam rising from the milk cans. We're losing something precious as those small operations disappear." "Not if we can help it," Ethan replied with quiet determination. "That's what this unexpected platform is allowing me to work toward." As the evening wound down, Sophia joined them at a quieter quarter table. "Surviving the Hollywood experience?" she asked with a knowing smile. "Barely," Ethan admitted. "Though Mark seems to be adapting better than I am." His son had indeed found his social footing, currently engaged in animated conversation with a group of young production assistants and junior writers across the room. "He's a natural bridge builder," Sophia observed. "Like his father." Ethan shook his head. "I'm still learning that skill. Mark's generation seems to move more easily between different worlds." "Speaking of moving between worlds," Sophia said, "I have a proposition for you. The network loved the viewer response to your follow-up segment. They've approved a special episode examining policy impacts on family farms, tentatively titled, From Fields to Federal Hall. We'd like you to co-host it with me." Ethan blinked in surprise. "Co-host? Sophia, I'm not a television personality." "That's precisely why viewers connect with you. You are authentic, knowledgeable, and genuinely invested in the subject matter. This wouldn't be about creating a new career for you. It would be a one-time special giving you a platform to share what you're learning through your committee work." The proposition was simultaneously flattering and terrifying. Appearing as a subject was one thing, actively shaping and presenting content was an entirely different level of public exposure. "I'd need to think about it," he said finally, "and discuss it with Mark." "Of course," Sophia agreed. "The filming wouldn't happen for at least 3 months. Just know the opportunity is there if you want it." The return to Riverdale brought welcome immersion in familiar routines. Fields needed attention, equipment required maintenance, and animals demanded their usual care regardless of award ceremonies or television opportunities. For several days, Ethan focused exclusively on farm operations, grateful for the grounding physicality of agricultural work. But as he settled back into daily patterns, his mind kept returning to Sophia's proposal. The special episode would provide an unprecedented platform for agricultural advocacy, a chance to translate policy discussions into terms that millions of viewers could understand and relate to. Yet it would also further blur the line between his private identity and public persona, a boundary already more permeable than he'd ever imagined possible. One evening, as he and Mark shared a simple dinner at the kitchen table, Ethan finally voiced the questions that had been circling in his mind. "Do you think I'm losing sight of who I really am with all these new roles? Television appearances, policy committees, award ceremonies. It's a long way from the life I thought I'd live." Mark considered the question seriously. "I don't think you're losing yourself, Dad. I think you're discovering parts of yourself that circumstances never called forward before. You're still the same person who gets up before dawn to milk cows and worries about rainfall patterns. You've just added new dimensions. Your mother would probably say I'm overthinking it. Mom would say you're exactly where you need to be, doing exactly what needs doing," Mark corrected gently. "She always believed your perspective deserved a wider audience." The mention of Sarah settled something in Ethan's mind. Throughout their marriage, she had been his most persistent advocate, always seeing capabilities in him that he hesitated to claim for himself. Perhaps these unexpected opportunities were a continuation of her influence in his life, pushing him beyond comfortable boundaries toward fuller expression of his potential. 2 weeks later, Ethan called Sophia to accept her co-hosting proposal, with certain conditions. Filming would work around his farming schedule, he would have input on content to ensure agricultural accuracy, and the production would include diverse voices from the farming community. Not just his own perspective. Those aren't just acceptable conditions, they're exactly what will make the special valuable, Sophia assured him. This isn't about creating entertainment, it's about authentic education and advocacy. Planning for the special unfolded over subsequent months, interwoven with Ethan's continuing farm operations and advisory committee responsibilities. The production team worked closely with him to identify key topics, interview subjects, and filming locations that would effectively illustrate the complex relationships between policy decisions and agricultural realities. By early autumn, 1 year after his original episode had aired, filming for From Fields to Federal Hall was underway. The special followed 3 narrative threads. Ethan's own farm as it implemented changes made possible by new opportunities, the advisory committees developing recommendations, and the stories of other family farms across the country facing similar challenges, with different response strategies. Working with Sophia in this new capacity revealed her professional depth beyond what Ethan had previously appreciated. Behind her camera-ready poise lay rigorous journalistic standards, meticulous research processes, and genuine commitment to respectful storytelling. She coached him through his initial discomfort with scripted segments, encouraged his authentic voice in interviews, and skillfully wove their different perspectives into coherent narrative. The special aired in November, coinciding with the advisory committee's presentation of preliminary recommendations to congressional agricultural subcommittees. The timing created a perfect opportunity for mainstream media coverage of family farming issues, with Ethan suddenly finding himself quoted in newspapers and invited onto morning talk shows as an agricultural advocate. The night the special aired, the community organized a viewing party at Riverdale High School's auditorium. Nearly 200 people gathered to watch their neighbor and his journey on the largest screen in town. When the credits rolled, the applause was thunderous, not just for Ethan, but for their collective story being told with dignity and purpose. Bernie Thompson approached him afterward, hand extended in genuine congratulation. "When you first pulled that TV host out of a ditch, I wouldn't have predicted this outcome in a million years. But watching tonight, it all makes perfect sense. You've always had this capacity, Ethan. The circumstances just never called for it before." The banker's words echoed Mark's assessment from months earlier, reinforcing Ethan's growing acceptance of his evolved identity. He was still fundamentally the same person, a farmer committed to his land and community, but he had discovered new ways to express that commitment beyond the physical boundaries of his property. As winters settled over Riverdale County, bringing the agricultural cycle to its annual pause, Ethan found himself reflecting on the extraordinary year behind him. The financial pressures that had once threatened to consume his legacy had eased significantly. The farm's operations had diversified in sustainable ways. His son was completing his final year of university with plans to return home and implement innovative techniques he'd studied. Most unexpectedly, Ethan had discovered a public voice he never knew he possessed, one that carried the authentic experiences of rural America into spaces where such perspectives were traditionally absent. Whether in Washington committee rooms or national television broadcasts, his straightforward articulation of agricultural realities resonated with audiences weary of polished corporate messaging. On a crisp December morning, as he walked the dormant fields that had sustained his family for generations, Ethan's phone chimed with a text message from Sophia. "Just heard from the network. Fields to Federal Hall had our highest ratings this season. They're asking about possibilities for a recurring segment on agricultural issues. Would you be interested in conversations about what that might look like?" Standing amid the sleeping soil that would awaken with spring's return, Ethan smiled at life's unpredictable turns. A year ago, he had been a struggling farmer with mounting debts and diminishing options. A simple act of roadside assistance, stopping to help a stranded motorist, as anyone would, had opened doors he never imagined existed. His reply was characteristically straightforward. "I'm interested in a conversation." The farm will always come first, but I'm learning there are many ways to serve the land and its people. As he tucked the phone back into his pocket and continued his morning inspection, Ethan felt a profound sense of integration between his past and this unexpected future. The legacy he had fought so hard to preserve was evolving in ways his ancestors could never have foreseen, yet remained rooted in the same fundamental values. Stewardship of the land, service to community, and faith that honest work carried its own reward sometimes, in forms you never thought to look for. That evening, as twilight settled over the farmhouse where 5 generations of millers had weathered the seasons of agricultural life, Ethan sat at his desk, composing an email to the advisory committee members. Outside his window, the bare branches of old oak trees stood silhouetted against the darkening sky trees planted by hands long stilled, but still bearing fruit for those who came after. In that moment of reflection, Ethan understood with perfect clarity that preservation and evolution were not opposing forces, but necessary partners in sustaining any worthwhile legacy. The future of family farming would require both faithful adherence to time-tested wisdom and bold adaptation to changing realities. And, in his own unexpected journey from private struggle to public advocacy, he had somehow become a living embodiment of that essential balance, a bridge between worlds that needed each other more than either fully realized